It was just past 6 in the evening when I heard the soft thud of Caleb's footsteps down the hallway. Outside, the rain was brushing the windows with a gentleness that almost mocked the heaviness in my chest. The house smelled of wood polish and faint rosemary from the soup Savannah had made earlier. The lighting was low, just the yellowish warmth of the standing lamp near the fireplace, and shadows clung to the corners of the living room like secrets. I sat in my recliner, my back stiff despite the cushion, a glass of water balanced on my knee. Caleb appeared in the doorway, tall and straight-backed, his expression unreadable. In his right hand, the bottle, my pills. He didn't say a word, just walked over and pressed them into my palm with the same practiced care he always did. I thanked him softly. He gave a small nod, barely perceptible, then turned and walked away. But something about it, everything about it, was wrong. I couldn't explain it then, not even to myself. Just that peculiar sensation you get when your skin feels a second too tight for your body, like the air had turned colder in a room still warm. Maybe it was the way he didn't look at me when he handed them over, or how his fingers lingered half a second too long. Maybe it was the silence, that dense, humming silence that followed him out the room. I didn't take the pill. Instead, I set the bottle down on the side table and stared at it, the label half peeled, my name scrawled in block letters. It was a new refill. I hadn't checked it. I always trusted Caleb to manage that part of things now. After all, the pills were for my heart. Irregular rhythms, sharp pains, the usual dance of a body that had spent decades running on too little sleep and too much stress. I hated that I needed them, hated even more that I'd come to rely on my son for something as basic as managing my prescriptions. I glanced toward the kitchen, where Savannah was drying a dish, her movements slow, meticulous, like she was stalling. She was a quiet girl, thoughtful, maybe a little timid, but lately I'd sensed something under the surface. A flicker of tension, the way her eyes followed Caleb when he thought no one was watching. The way she'd begun checking on me more than usual, asking how I felt, offering tea at odd times. I didn't know her well. Caleb had only brought her home 6 months ago, said she was just staying for a little while until she figured things out. But she'd settled in fast, learned how I liked my coffee, started leaving little notes when she went out, a gentle presence. Kind. There was a sadness about her that made me ache, one of those girls who never learned how to take up space. She caught me looking and offered a small smile. I tried to return it, but my lips barely moved. There's a kind of knowing that happens not in words, but in bones. A quiet voice inside you that whispers when things are coming undone. That voice was getting louder. I sat with that bottle beside me for over an hour, just listening to the storm outside and watching the hallway. Caleb never came back in. The house had gone quiet again, but not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that follows an argument or a lie. When I finally got up, my knees protested. I reached for the bottle, turning it over in my hand. Same pills, same color, same shape. But I hesitated again. Just that whisper in my gut telling me wait. It wasn't the first time I'd ignored it, but it might have been the last. That night, Savannah came into my room after Caleb had gone to bed. Her eyes were red, but she didn't look like she'd been crying. She stood in the doorway for a long time, wringing her hands like she was gathering courage. "Can I sit?" she asked softly. I nodded, motioning to the foot of the bed. She lowered herself slowly, her body taut like a wire. There was a long pause before she spoke. "I need to tell you something," she said, barely above a whisper. "Something about Caleb." My throat closed. I waited. She took a breath, then another. He took out a life insurance policy on you, a big one." The air left the room. "He said you were getting sicker," she continued, her voice trembling, "that it was just being responsible, but I saw the documents. He never told you. And then he started acting weird, like he was watching how much you took, asking about your heart, and I'm sorry, I didn't know what to do." I just stared at her. I couldn't even speak, because somewhere deep inside I already knew. The bottle was still on my nightstand. It hadn't moved. And suddenly everything about the evening clicked into place. The silence, the weight in the air, the look in his eyes. The bitter taste of betrayal was already in my mouth. It was the day before the pills. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and burned toast. Savannah had tried baking again, something she rarely did, and the results had landed squarely in the trash. The rain hadn't started yet, but clouds had rolled in like bruises across the sky, casting the room in a strange, muted light. She hovered by the counter, holding a mug with both hands like it was a shield. Her knuckles were pale. I was seated at the small breakfast nook, flipping absently through a catalog I hadn't meant to order, trying not to notice how restless she looked. "I need to tell you something," she said, same words as later, but this time the urgency wasn't as sharp, more like a tremor running beneath the surface. I looked up. She didn't meet my eyes. "It's about Caleb," she said. That got my attention. She set the mug down with a soft clink and pressed her fingers to her temples, exhaling like she'd been holding her breath for years. "I found something," she said finally, "in the safe. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I was looking for the house deed like he asked, but there were papers, insurance forms." With your name, I stared at her, confused. "What kind of insurance?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She swallowed. "Life insurance," she whispered. "A big one, 2 million." I blinked. The room tilted slightly. "He... what?" "He took it out months ago," she said quickly. "Without your knowledge. I checked. You never signed anything. But he did. He listed himself as the sole beneficiary." I sat back, my heart beginning to thud in a way I'd come to know too well. I could hear the whirring of the refrigerator, the hum of the ceiling light. Everything else had gone quiet. "That doesn't make sense," I said, "because that's what you say when something punches through your world like a bullet." "He wouldn't do that. I would have known." "I thought so too," she whispered. I kept telling myself maybe it was just precaution, but then I started noticing things. The way he asks about your meds, how he watches when you take them, how he keeps the refills locked up. My throat was dry. "That's just Caleb. He's always been protective." Her eyes lifted to mine finally. "Or controlling." The words hit like a slap. I looked away, eyes settling on the smudged edge of the window. I'd raised Caleb alone. His father was long gone, ran off when he was barely 3. I'd poured everything I had into making Caleb feel safe, loved, strong. I went without so he wouldn't have to. I defended him against teachers, against other parents, even when he was clearly in the wrong. He was my whole world. "Are you sure?" I asked, barely managing the words. "Are you absolutely sure?" She nodded. "I saw the policy. I even called the company anonymously to confirm. It's real." My stomach turned. This isn't happening." She sat across from me then, her eyes pleading. I didn't know what to do. I love him, but this scared me. I felt something break open in my chest, a slow, oozing ache that seeped through my ribs. The disbelief wasn't just about the policy, it was about who Caleb might really be, about who I might have raised. Was this my fault? Had I taught him that love meant control, that power meant safety, that taking what you needed regardless of the cost was strength? The thought made me sick. "You're saying he did this deliberately?" I asked, my voice brittle. "That he meant to? I don't know," she said quickly. "But I overheard him once, on the phone. He was talking about you like a problem to be solved. He didn't know I was in the hall." "What did he say?" She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "He said he was managing the situation, that it would all be over soon." My breath hitched. "And you didn't think to tell me then?" "I was scared," she said. "I didn't know what he might do, and then—" Her voice cracked. "He told me not to get too close to you." The words froze in the air. "He said what?" She nodded, eyes glassy. "He said you were manipulative, that you play the victim, that you'll make me feel guilty if I stay too long." I sat back, stunned. It wasn't just about the money, it was the story he'd told about me, the narrative he'd crafted to justify what he was doing, that I was the unstable one, that I deserved it. The betrayal was deeper than I could put into words. I wasn't perfect, God knows I wasn't, but I'd loved him with every fiber of my being. I stayed up nights helping him with homework, skipped meals so he could have new shoes, held him through heartbreaks and hangovers. And now he was telling the woman he lived with that I was a liability, a leech. I covered my face with both hands. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat there, breathing through the storm building inside me. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked after a long silence. "Because I think something's wrong," she said. "And because you deserve to know before it's too late." I nodded slowly, and for the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own son. Before Caleb, before Savannah, before the silence in my living room ever felt like danger, there was another silence I knew all too well, the one that lingered in the home I grew up in. It wasn't the kind of silence born from peace. It was the absence of kindness, of softness, a cold vacuum filled with rules and looks and unspoken disapproval. My mother ruled our small Midwestern home like a courtroom where she was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. She spoke rarely, and when she did, it was either to correct or condemn. I remember the sharp sting of her slap the first time I cried in front of her. I was 8, and my pet rabbit had died. I held its tiny, lifeless body in my arms, shaking. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her lips pressed thin. I sobbed, waiting for her to kneel beside me, to tell me it was okay to feel broken. Instead, she yanked me up by the arm, dragged me into the bathroom, and slapped me across the face so hard my ears rang. "Don't you dare cry over something that small," she hissed. "You think life's going to be kind to you just because you're sad?" After that, I learned to hide. I'd crawl into the back of the closet when I needed to feel anything, press my face into my own sweater so she wouldn't hear me breathe too loud. On birthdays, there was no singing, just a card left on the table, sometimes unsigned. The lessons were silent, but they stuck. Weakness was punished, vulnerability mocked. And women, we were tools. We cooked, we cleaned, we endured. We did not dream. We did not speak unless spoken to. We did not cry unless we wanted bruises. By the time I was a teenager, I had stopped trying to be her daughter. I was just a presence in her house, moving around her like a shadow, careful not to take up too much space. But the damage had already been done. Somewhere deep inside, I'd internalized the belief that love was something to be earned through suffering. That to be good, to be accepted, I had to anticipate needs, stay quiet, never challenge, never want too much. It turned me into a perfect little servant, pleasing, agreeable, eager to be liked. So when I became a mother, I swore it would be different. "I'll give him everything I never had," I whispered to myself the day I held Caleb for the first time. He was so small, swaddled and red-faced, but his fingers curled around mine, like he'd already made me his whole world. And I let him, gladly. He became my sun and my shadow. I poured myself into him like a woman starving for meaning. I gave him freedom where I had none, praise where I'd only known silence, choices when all I'd been handed were rules. I worked double shifts to afford his violin lessons, fought with school boards when teachers accused him of being too aggressive, and stayed up nights rewriting resumes when he couldn't land internships. When he hurt others, I told myself he was just passionate. When he shut me out, I assumed he needed space. I never stopped justifying him, because I couldn't bear the thought that the love I gave, the sacrifices I made, might not be enough. But now, as I sit in the wreckage of what I thought was a safe life, I wonder, did I give him love or did I give him power? I taught him that strength meant silence, that emotions were inconvenient. I never let him see me cry. I never told him how scared I was raising him alone, how sometimes I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed into a towel just to keep from shattering in front of him. I called it strength, but it was a performance. And maybe that's what he learned, that love is something to be performed, not felt. That vulnerability is a trick, that people are either useful or in the way. I can see it now, how the same patterns repeated, the control, the secrecy, the cold detachment. I remember a conversation we had when he was 13. He'd punched another boy at school. I asked him why. He looked at me with a face too calm for his age and said, "Because he was weak. He cried in front of everyone." And I said nothing, because deep down, part of me agreed. That moment has haunted me since Savannah's confession. That one sentence, that look on his face. the echo of my mother's voice in the words of my son. I had tried to build a new home, one free from the poisons of my past, but I didn't clear the foundation. I built it all on the same ash and debris I thought I'd escaped, and now the walls are crumbling. Because I see him clearly now, not just as my son, but as someone who learned from my silence, who mimicked my survival and turned it into strategy. I raised him to be strong, yes, but maybe in doing so, I taught him never to be soft. And now, I don't know if I can undo it. Looking back, I realize I always told people Caleb was special. Not just smart, sharp, not just kind, considerate. He learned early how to wear the face people wanted to see. Teachers adored him, neighbors complimented his manners, and strangers smiled when he spoke. He was articulate, poised, the kind of child who made other parents ask what my secret was. I remember one afternoon in third grade, parent-teacher conference. Mrs. Lowry, his homeroom teacher, had that "I hate conflict but must deliver bad news" expression. She said Caleb had been caught switching another child's test sheet with his own. She was confused. He had already aced the exam. There was no reason to cheat. When she left the room briefly, I asked Caleb why he'd done it. He looked up from his seat, calm as anything, and said, "Because Kyle's mom promised him ice cream if he got an A, and I knew he wouldn't." I stared at him, stunned into silence. He smiled faintly, proud, like he'd solved a complicated puzzle. And God help me, I felt something close to pride. He wasn't malicious, not then, just clever. Compassionate in his own calculated way. Now I see that moment differently. He knew how to manipulate systems, people, even outcomes, without ever getting his hands dirty. He'd learned the power of perception early and mastered it before he turned 10. As he grew, the charm sharpened. He got more handsome, more polished. By high school, he knew how to deflect blame so well that even I would second-guess myself. When he missed curfews, there were always compelling stories. When he failed to call, he'd come home with flowers. And I accepted all of it. Because I needed to believe he was good. Because I had spent my whole life fighting to give him a better one. And because it was easier to cling to the son I'd imagined than face the one in front of me. Now, the mask he wore back then seems to shimmer through our present-day conversations. He still says the right things, brings home groceries without being asked, makes my coffee the way I like it. But there's something in his eyes, restlessness, calculation. When he speaks, there's a delay, like he's editing in real time. When I ask about work, he always keeps it vague. Busy, up and down. You know how real estate is. And yet, his suits are new. His car, a sleek black Tesla. His shoes shine to the kind of gleam that only comes from professional care. The house he's moved into with Savannah has vaulted ceilings, granite countertops, and a home office with 2 monitors and a designer lamp. He once joked about it being their starter palace, but when Savannah and I talked in hushed tones after her confession, her words cracked the image I had so carefully upheld. "He says you're a burden," she'd told me, "that he's just managing you until things settle." I remember blinking like she'd spoken in a different language. "Managing?" She nodded, nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. "He talks about you like a liability, like he's stuck with you." The sentence echoed in my head for days. It wasn't just painful, it was clarifying. All those small moments, the missed calls, the subtle irritation when I asked for help with the groceries, the way he would sigh when I forgot a doctor's appointment. None of it was care. It was performance, obligation, or worse, strategy. I'd spent years telling myself I knew Caleb inside and out, that I could sense his moods, read his silences, but now I'm not so sure I ever really knew him. Maybe I only knew the version he showed me, the one that would earn loyalty, forgiveness, love. Maybe I needed him to be good so badly that I ignored the parts of him that weren't. Savannah and I had gone quiet since that conversation in the kitchen. We kept to opposite ends of the house, speaking only when necessary, both haunted by the same realization, that the person we thought we knew was someone else entirely. Then, one afternoon, just after Caleb left for a last-minute meeting, Savannah stepped into the living room, her face pale. "I've been thinking," she said. I looked up from my knitting, trying to keep my hands from trembling. She sat down, carefully, like her legs might betray her. You haven't been feeling dizzy lately, have you? She asked. I frowned. Not more than usual. Why? She hesitated, then pulled something from her coat pocket, a small clear bag with a single pill in it, one of mine. I kept one, she said. From a few days ago, I don't know, I had this feeling. I took the bag from her slowly, my stomach dropping. You think he… I don't know, she said quickly, but something's not right. You should get them tested, just in case. I stared at the capsule, its harmless shape, its ordinary color. It looked like every other pill I'd taken for the past year. But now it sat in my palm like a question with no answer. Was it protection or poison? I stood in the doorway of my bedroom for what felt like hours, the pill bottle sitting on my nightstand like it was daring me to touch it. My hands were already clammy, breath shallow. Every step toward that bottle felt heavier than the last. When I finally reached it, my fingers trembled so badly I almost dropped it. It was absurd, really. This thing that had lived on my nightstand for months, something I'd taken without a second thought, suddenly felt like a snake in my palm. I twisted the cap off, poured 2 capsules into my hand, and stared. They looked the same. Round, pale blue, a thin groove across the center. Normal, completely normal. But Savannah's voice was still ringing in my ears. I kept one, just in case. I didn't trust my judgment anymore. That was the hardest part. The part no one warns you about. The breaking point isn't always dramatic. It's a quiet moment in a quiet room when you realize you can't even trust the people who share your blood. Savannah waited by the front door, keys in hand. She didn't ask if I was ready, just opened the door and walked me to the car. The rain had stopped, but the roads were still slick, the sky bruised with leftover thunderclouds. We drove mostly in silence, the windshield wipers squeaking out a slow, steady rhythm like a ticking clock. I called ahead, she said finally. Told them we needed discretion. You think they'll keep it confidential? I asked. They promised, and they didn't ask questions. The lab sat at the edge of town, tucked behind an aging strip mall that smelled faintly of mildew and forgotten dreams. It didn't look like much, just a plain, concrete building with a buzzing neon open sign and a doorbell that made a sickly chime when we stepped in. A woman behind the counter looked up, mid-40s, bored eyes, fingers stained with ink from the clipboard she was marking. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing when Savannah handed her the bag with the pill. Name? She asked. Savannah gave her mine. Purpose of test? Possible tampering, Savannah said quietly. The woman blinked, then nodded, her tone suddenly professional. We'll run a composite analysis. Should be ready by tomorrow morning. Want a call or in-person pickup? In person, I said. She nodded again and disappeared behind a back door. We sat in plastic chairs that squeaked every time we shifted. A fluorescent light above us flickered like it was trying to die. After a while, Savannah spoke. You know, she said, this feels like something out of a Netflix docuseries. I let out a soft laugh, almost involuntarily. You think they'll call it Murder by Pill Organizer? She cracked a smile. Or Mother Knows Best Until She Doesn't. It felt good to laugh, even if just for a second. Even if it didn't reach my eyes. But the silence that followed was heavier. Because the humor was a dam, barely holding back the flood underneath. As we drove home, the dread settled deeper. The roads were darker now, the houses along our route casting sleepy shadows. I pressed my forehead against the window, watching the blur of trees and porch lights, feeling the knot in my stomach grow tighter. At home, I didn't even bother changing clothes. I lay in bed with the lights off, eyes open, thoughts racing. I kept trying to rewind time in my head, trying to replay moments with Caleb, looking for signs. There was that time he insisted on organizing my pills for me, said I kept forgetting. I'd felt grateful then, touched. And that morning 2 weeks ago when I was lightheaded and disoriented, he told me it was my blood pressure. I drank orange juice and went back to bed. He brought me soup that night. He always brought me soup when I wasn't feeling well. Was that kindness or choreography? And the sudden increase in life insurance, the conversations he steered away from, the way he always changed the subject when I asked about my accounts, the new Tesla he claimed was from a smart investment. The pieces began to form something, a shape I didn't want to see, but I couldn't stop it. I felt like a detective in my own life, combing through old memories like crime scenes. And under it all was the ache of betrayal, of fear, but most of all, of loss. Not the loss of life, but of illusion, of the version of Caleb I'd carried with me for so long. Because even if the pills came back clean, even if nothing was in them, I had already lost something I could never get back: trust. And maybe, just maybe, the version of Caleb I thought I loved never really existed at all. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Not that I expected it to. My body was tired, but my mind refused to slow down. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself back in that sterile hospital hallway the night Caleb was born. I hadn't thought about that night in years, but now it replayed in my head with startling clarity. The hum of fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, the throb in my lower back from 14 hours of labor. I was 24, broke, scared, and very much alone. His father had already left by then, disappeared like a ghost the moment I told him I was pregnant. I remember gripping the sides of the hospital bed, pain shooting up my spine, and thinking, I'm going to do this. I have to. When Caleb came out, red-faced and screaming, something inside me cracked open. I held him close, skin to skin, and whispered things into his soft, damp hair. Promises I had no idea how to keep. I'll protect you. Always. I'll never let you feel unloved. I'd meant it. With everything in me, I meant it. Now, decades later, I was lying in my bed again. Only this time the room was dark, and the only thing I held was a bottle of pills that might have been poisoned. The promises I'd made had twisted into something unrecognizable, and that fierce protectiveness I'd once felt had curdled into fear. The bottle sat on my nightstand like a sentinel. I couldn't look at it, couldn't move it. Just knowing it was there made my chest tighten. I needed someone to talk to. Someone who knew me before Caleb became what he is now. Someone who remembered the before. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found her. Lorraine. We hadn't spoken in a while, but she had been my anchor for years. A nurse, a firebrand, and one of the few people who'd seen me both shattered and whole. She picked up after 3 rings. Wow, look what the storm blew in, she said, her voice still rough with sleep, but unmistakably warm. It's nearly midnight. You okay? I swallowed. I don't know. Her face softened on the screen. Talk to me. So I did. I told her everything about Savannah, the insurance policy, the pills, the creeping realization that something dark had been growing inside my son, and I'd been too blind, or maybe too afraid, to see it. She didn't interrupt, just listened, brows furrowed, occasionally shaking her head. When I finished, there was a long pause. I don't know what to say, I admitted. It feels like a nightmare, like I'm still in that damn hospital room, only this time I'm the one in danger. Lorraine leaned forward, the screen jittering slightly. I need to tell you something, she said slowly. I wasn't going to bring it up. It felt off at the time, but I didn't think much of it. What is it? About 6 years ago, I was working the late shift. You'd come in for that chest pain scare, remember? I nodded. Vaguely. It had turned out to be a panic attack. Well, she continued, about 2 days later, Caleb came to the desk asking for your medical file, said he needed it for insurance purposes. I frowned. He never mentioned that. That's the thing. He didn't have authorization. When we told him that, he got weirdly pushy. Not angry, just smooth. Like he was trying to talk his way around the rules. Said he had power of attorney, but he didn't. I felt my stomach twist. He left after a few minutes, Lorraine said. Didn't make a scene. But he came back an hour later and tried again with a different nurse. Why would he do that? I whispered. I didn't think about it until now, she said. But maybe this didn't start recently. Maybe he's been laying the groundwork for years. I leaned back against the headboard, head spinning. What had felt like a sudden betrayal now unfolded into something much colder, something calculated. And then Lorraine added, almost as an afterthought, you know what's strange, though? His father once did something similar. I blinked. What? She nodded grimly. Years ago, when you were still pregnant, he came to the clinic asking about your records, claimed he wanted to check on the baby's health, but we suspected it was about the inheritance your grandmother left you. I felt the air leave my lungs. I never knew that. Didn't think you needed to, she said gently. But maybe you do now. So it wasn't just Caleb. This pattern, this hunger cloaked in charm, it ran deeper. A legacy passed down like a curse. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the sky slowly shift from black to gray, trying to decide which was worse. The idea that my son had turned into a stranger, or the realization that maybe he'd always been this way. And I'd just never let myself see it. There are moments that stay with you, buried like splinters just under the skin. You don't always feel them until something touches the edge of memory, and suddenly the old wound burns like it's fresh. That's what happened after I hung up with Lorraine. I couldn't stop thinking about Caleb's father, about how far back the rot reached. His name was Daniel. When we met, I was 20 and stupid for love. He was 10 years older, magnetic, clever, the kind of man who looked at you like you were the answer to a question he didn't know he was asking. He made me feel seen, important, wanted. And then very slowly, he made me feel small. It started with subtle things. My outfits were too revealing. My friends were a bad influence. My laugh was too loud. At first, I adjusted. I thought it was love, someone caring enough to want the best version of me. Then the criticisms turned into rules, and the rules became threats. I remember one night in our apartment, a fight over a phone call I missed. He cornered me in the kitchen, hand clenched around my wrist hard enough to leave bruises, whispering, "Don't make me into the bad guy. You know how much I love you." That was his favorite trick, reframing cruelty as care, telling me his violence was my fault, that if I were just better, quieter, more grateful, he wouldn't have to act that way. The night I told him I was pregnant, he stared at me for a full minute. Then he smiled, but it never reached his eyes. A week later, he was gone. Back then, I told myself it was a blessing. I'd escaped. I had survived. But now, staring down the truth of who Caleb had become, I saw Daniel in every cold smirk, every calculated move, every weaponized silence. The same hunger for control, the same talent for playing the victim, the same ability to twist love into a leash. And it hit me so hard I had to sit down. I had confused control for protection. Again. With Daniel, I'd stayed too long because I thought his jealousy meant he cared. With Caleb, I ignored the red flags because I thought his insistence on managing my health was love. But it wasn't love. It was power. It was about who got to decide who mattered. I'd spent so long believing I was breaking a cycle, when in reality, I'd just passed it on, polished and softened, but still poison. I needed air. I needed something to remind me that not every part of my life had been a lie. I found myself in the attic, digging through old boxes. There was one I hadn't touched in years, a battered cardboard thing labeled Mom's Things in black marker. I opened it, expecting old photos, maybe a recipe book, but instead I found journals, dozens of them, my mother's writing. I hesitated. She'd never shared anything with me while she was alive. Her words had always been sharp, weaponized, measured, but something pulled me in. I opened one. The handwriting was tight, neat, almost angry in its precision. Weakness is how they trap you. If they see you cry, they own you. Better to be feared than pitied. Better to be alone than indebted. Page after page, it was the same. Bitterness masquerading as strength, mistrust tangled in every word, pride in control, shame in softness. My chest tightened. This was the woman who raised me, and the ideology she'd passed down, unspoken but ever present, had seeped into my bones, into how I loved, how I mothered, how I survived, and now into Caleb. The inheritance hadn't been money or property or even a name. It was malice, polished through generations, passed from mother to daughter, from father to son, an ideology of power above empathy, dominance above tenderness. And God forgive me, I hadn't questioned it. Not enough. I closed the journal slowly, as if shutting it could somehow silence the echoes, but they were already too loud, because I saw it now, the full picture. Caleb wasn't just my son. He was the culmination of everything I'd run from, every silence I mistook for safety, every cruelty I excused, every moment I'd chosen survival over truth. And if I didn't do something, if I didn't stop this, it would continue. Through him, through whoever he chose to hurt next. The past wasn't just haunting me, it was shaping my future, unless I chose differently, unless I finally broke the chain. The call came just after 8 a.m., piercing the quiet like a blade. I had barely slept, just drifted in and out of a restless fog, the kind of half-sleep that leaves you more exhausted than you started. Savannah was already in the kitchen when the phone rang. She froze mid-pour, the kettle tipping slightly as steam hissed against porcelain. I answered with trembling fingers. "Mrs. Reed?" The voice on the other end said. "This is Willow Path Labs. We have the results from the analysis you requested." My breath caught. "There is evidence of a sedative." The voice continued, "specifically zolpidem, in doses significantly higher than prescribed for medical use." I blinked. "That's a sleeping pill, right?" "Yes, but at this concentration, it can impair cognition, cause fainting, or, depending on age and weight, induce a cardiac event." I nodded, though the phone felt a mile away from my ear. "Thank you." I hung up, just stood there, the words echoing like static in my skull. Savannah stared at me. "What did they say?" "It's in the pills," I said, "a sedative, a dangerous one." Her hand went to her mouth, eyes wide with horror. "Oh my God!" And that's when the tears came, not the kind that trickle, the kind that choke you. I sank to the floor, the grief and fury erupting at once. Savannah dropped beside me, her own sobs trembling in the silence. We held each other without words. It was real, it wasn't a theory, it wasn't paranoia. Caleb had drugged me, he had actually drugged me. Somewhere between shock and rage, I felt my body go cold. The ache was sharp and primal. It wasn't just betrayal, it was annihilation. The child I bore, nursed, sang to in the dead of night, had tried to erase me. We were still on the floor when the front door opened, the sound of keys, then his voice. "Mom?" Savannah froze. My heart seized. Caleb stepped into the hallway with casual ease, phone in hand, jacket slung over one shoulder. "There you are," he said. "I've been trying to call. Why aren't you answering?" His eyes flicked to the coffee table, to the missing pill bottle. "What happened?" he asked, voice tighter now. "Where are your meds?" Neither of us moved. He walked toward us slowly. Too slowly. His jaw was clenched, eyes darting between us. And then his voice dropped an octave. Smooth, calculated. "Did Savannah tell you something? Something ridiculous?" Savannah stood up before I could. Her voice was steady but sharp. "We had the pills tested." He blinked. "What?" "We took one, had it tested, zolpidem, high dose. You've been drugging her." Caleb's face didn't register shock, just disappointment, like a parent catching a child with a bad report card. "I can't believe you'd go behind my back like that," he said, looking at me. "Mom, do you know how dangerous this is? Messing with medication records, making false accusations?" "I didn't mess with anything," I said, my voice shaking. "You did." He stepped closer. Too close. "I've been helping you, taking care of you. You're forgetting things. Savannah's been feeding you lies, twisting things. She's unstable, Mom." "You told her I was unstable," I snapped. "You told her not to trust me." He scoffed, glancing away. "I said you've been struggling. That's not a lie." Savannah's fists clenched. "We know about the insurance policy. We know about the refill logs. Stop pretending." Caleb tilted his head, suddenly calm. "What's the point of this? You really think I'd hurt my own mother? For what? Money?" I didn't say a word. I just reached into the drawer and pulled out the lab report, still sealed in its envelope. I tossed it onto the table between us. He stared at it, said nothing. His silence was louder than anything he could have spoken. Finally, he exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Fine," he said. "You want the truth? I'll give you the truth." Savannah and I held still. "I did it," he said. "Okay? I gave you small doses, nothing lethal, just enough to make things easier." I flinched. "Easier?" He nodded. You were declining anyway, slipping. I figured if I had a financial cushion, I could afford to focus on helping someone else. What someone else? Savannah demanded. Caleb's face changed then, something flickering in his eyes that almost looked like pain. Her name was Leah, he said. She was my girlfriend. Before Savannah, she had ovarian cancer, stage 4, no insurance. I drained everything trying to help her. Loans, credit cards, even sold my first condo to pay for her treatment. He paused. She died anyway. For a second, the room went still. I tried to move on, he said, voice lower now. But the debt, it followed me. I couldn't breathe under it. I thought if I could get ahead just once, if I could make it right somehow. You thought killing me would make it right? I said, stunned. His face hardened. I didn't try to kill you. I tried to prepare. You were getting worse. I thought, why not use that? At least make your suffering mean something. My body went rigid. There it was. Not guilt, not regret, just logic. Cold, remorseless logic. Savannah stepped back, horror on her face. I didn't want to believe it, she whispered. But you're a monster. Caleb shrugged. I'm a survivor, just like you, Mom. But I wasn't like him, not anymore. And now I would prove it. Caleb sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, face in his hands like a child caught red-handed. But there were no tears, just silence. When he finally spoke, it was in that same even tone I'd heard countless times. Cool, rehearsed, almost sympathetic. But underneath, I could feel it. The same distance, the same emotional remove he'd shown since the truth unraveled. Her name was Leah, he said without looking up. She was 28. We met at a real estate seminar in Scottsdale. Smart, funny, couldn't cook to save her life. She got sick about 8 months in. Savannah stood by the front door, arms crossed, jaw tight. I was still rooted to the armchair, the lab report discarded on the coffee table like a weapon after a war. She didn't tell anyone at first, Caleb continued. Didn't want pity. When she finally let me in, it was already bad. Stage 4, no insurance, no support system, just me. He leaned back, finally meeting my eyes. I did everything I could. Sold assets, maxed out credit, tried alternative clinics, flew her to Mexico for a trial treatment. Nothing worked. I could see the grief flicker behind his eyes, but it didn't soften what he'd done. If anything, it made it more dangerous, because he believed that loss justified everything. When she died, he said, voice tightening, I lost everything, not just her. My business, my credit, my mind. I went into survival mode. And I was your solution? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He didn't flinch. You were already slipping. I thought if I could manage things, make the transition easier, maybe there could be something left behind to rebuild. To rebuild you, I snapped, not me. Savannah stepped closer now, her voice sharp. You manipulated both of us, lied to us, drugged her. You think grief gives you the right? Caleb's eyes darted to her. You don't understand what it's like to watch someone you love die. I do, she cut in. Every time your mother stumbled into a room, dazed, every time I saw her forget a conversation we'd had the day before and wonder if it was dementia or something else. I've been watching her fade, Caleb, and I didn't once think of profiting off it. His jaw clenched. You didn't know her before I cleaned up the mess. You have no idea what I had to deal with growing up. I stared at him, stunned. I was never perfect, but I was there, every damn day. He turned back to me, finally showing some edge beneath the practiced calm. You were needy, he said, clingy. You called 3 times a day when I was at college. You cried when I moved out. I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened. Because I loved you. He shook his head. Because you made me responsible for your happiness. Your whole identity was wrapped around me. I felt the accusation land hard, but I didn't retreat from it. Maybe I did lean on you too much, I said, but that doesn't excuse what you did. I gave you everything. He smiled, cold and slow. Exactly, and eventually, you had nothing left to give. Savannah recoiled as if he'd struck her. You don't feel anything, do you? She whispered. You sat there and watched her take those pills and hoped they'd slow her down because that made her easier to control. Caleb stood then, adjusting his sleeves. I did what I had to. I tried to make something good out of something inevitable. I didn't poison her, I adjusted her dosage. You played God, I said. He met my gaze, steady. I played survival. I shook my head slowly. You didn't do this because you were desperate. You did it because you could. Because somewhere along the way, you started believing people were just obstacles to navigate. Savannah took a step back, her voice hollow. All this time, I thought you were just guarded, careful, but you were grooming us, keeping us compliant. I gave you a good life, Caleb said. Nice home, no bills. I didn't lock you in a tower, Savannah. No, she said. You made me build the tower myself. The finality in her voice made my breath catch. She reached for her coat, eyes blazing. I'm done, she said. You're on your own. Caleb opened his mouth to speak, but she didn't give him the chance. She walked out the door, closing it behind her with the quiet authority of someone reclaiming her dignity. He turned to me one last time. You're not going to press charges, he said, like it was a certainty. You can't handle the spotlight, the public attention, the questions. I looked at him, truly looked, and saw the void where remorse should be. You're right, I said. I can't undo what you did, but I can make sure you never do it again. And in that moment, I meant it. The days after Savannah left and Caleb disappeared from my life felt like aftershocks, quiet tremors rumbling through a body already cracked by disaster. I moved through the house like a ghost, tracing the outlines of a life that no longer fit. I was broken, yes, but I was also alive. There was power in that realization. Fragile, flickering power, but power nonetheless. I started therapy. My first session was a blur. Just me, a box of tissues, and a soft-spoken woman named Marla, who didn't flinch when I told her my son had drugged me. Her office smelled of lavender and had mismatched throw pillows. I hated it at first. It felt too gentle for what I'd lived through. But she listened, really listened, and that was more than I'd allowed myself in years. Week by week, I peeled back layers I didn't know I'd built. I talked about my mother's cruelty, Daniel's manipulation, Caleb's charm-turned strategy, the way love, in my world, had always arrived with strings and shadows, the way I'd blurred devotion with dependence. There were moments I couldn't speak through the sobs. Other times, the silence in the room said more than my voice ever could. Marla gave me an assignment, write it all down, so I did. Late into the night, I sat at my old desk and let the words pour out. I wrote about the first time Caleb tied his shoes, about the way Daniel's voice sounded when he was about to turn cruel, about Savannah's trembling hand when she told me the truth. I wrote it all, past and present, love and betrayal, hope and horror. Some pages were smeared with tears, others with ink too heavy from pressing too hard. But it helped. Every chapter gave shape to the chaos. I also started walking, just simple paths through the local park, where the trees were still budding and the benches were worn but welcoming. I watched birds, breathed fresh air, nodded at passing joggers. I let the wind remind me that my story hadn't ended. In one of my group therapy sessions, I met Isaac. He was younger, late 20s maybe. Tall, quiet, with eyes that held too much experience for someone his age. He'd lost his mother to an overdose, said he never got to make peace with her. That grief followed him like a second shadow. He started walking with me after sessions. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we wouldn't. It wasn't about the words, it was about being seen without explanation. He helped me with small things, a leaky faucet, lifting heavy boxes. I offered him coffee, comfort, stories. He never asked for more. In him, I saw what I had once hoped Caleb would be, kind, present, unguarded, and I let myself feel that small warmth, the ache of a mother heart finding rhythm again, even if it wasn't biological. Every day wasn't a triumph. There were still nights I woke up reaching for the pills, half expecting to see Caleb's silhouette in the hallway. But the house stayed quiet, and that silence began to feel less like grief and more like freedom. He never asked for more. In him, I saw what I had once hoped Caleb would be, kind, present, unguarded. and I let myself feel that small warmth, the ache of a mother heart finding rhythm again, even if it wasn't biological. Every day wasn't a triumph. There were still nights I woke up reaching for the pills, half expecting to see Caleb's silhouette in the hallway, but the house stayed quiet, and that silence began to feel less like grief and more like freedom. One Tuesday morning, I checked my mail. There was a plain envelope addressed by hand, no return address. Inside was a short letter from a local attorney. She had taken on a pro bono case for someone else, an elderly man from another county whose daughter had passed unexpectedly. The man had requested her help reviewing insurance claims that seemed off. Caleb's name was in the file, not just once, 3 different policies, 3 different elderly clients, all linked to investment advice, consultation, or care services he'd provided. All dead. My breath left me like a slap. I sat on the porch, letter in hand, as the birds chirped and the world continued turning. The attorney had found my name through public records, suspected a pattern, and reached out quietly. She wasn't certain yet, but she was digging. Caleb wasn't just a lost son, he was a predator. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one he'd tried to silence with charm and a pill. The revelation didn't destroy me. It clarified me, because now I understood the scale of what I'd survived and the scale of what I had to do next. The holding room smelled like bleach and old paper, clinical and quiet, like even the walls had grown tired of secrets. I waited on the visitor's side of the glass partition, hands folded in my lap, knees locked to keep them from shaking. I hadn't seen Caleb since the investigation had gone public, since the detectives came to my door with clipped voices and subtle apologies. He'd been arrested quietly. No cuffs in the driveway, no dramatic headlines. Just an unmarked car and the weight of undeniable evidence. He requested to see me. I said yes, because I needed this, not to forgive, but to finish. He entered in county-issued gray, still upright, still composed. His face was thinner, sharper, but his eyes, those were unchanged. Calm, studied, like he was trying to calculate the emotional temperature of the room before he spoke. He picked up the phone first. I followed. "Mom," he said, like we were starting a Sunday call. I didn't smile. "Caleb." Silence settled like fog. "You look good," he said. "Better than I expected." "You expected me dead," I replied. He blinked just once. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted. "And I'm not here for a confession. I already have that." His jaw tightened, but he didn't drop the act. "I know what you think of me," he said, "but you have no idea what it was like, after Leah, after the debt. I was drowning." I leaned closer, my voice quiet but firm. "I loved you more than life itself. I gave you everything I had, and you saw that as weakness. You looked at my love like it was a disease to be managed." His eyes flickered. "You were always fragile," he said, "always needing more than anyone could give." "And you were always taking," I said, "always needing to be the one with the power." "I did what I had to," he said flatly. "Everyone does." "No," I said, "not everyone. Not everyone poisons their mother and calls it mercy. Not everyone wraps their survival in deception and thinks that's strength." His hand tightened on the receiver. "You think this makes you righteous now?" he hissed. "You're just the victim again. Always the victim." "No," I said, voice breaking. "Not anymore. I'm just someone who finally stopped mistaking silence for safety." He stared at me for a long time, but the anger never fully formed. Just that hollow disappointment again, like I'd failed some invisible test. "I'm not scared of you," I said. "Not of what you did, not of what you are." His mouth twitched. "You think you're healed now?" "No," I said softly. "But I'm healing. And there's a difference." I placed the phone down gently and stood. His voice followed, muffled through the glass. "You'll die alone, you know. All that love you gave, it never came back." I paused just for a moment. Then I turned, my heels echoing on the linoleum, every step a release. Outside, the rain was falling in soft sheets, not harsh, not punishing, just steady, cleansing. I walked straight into it, head high, coat open. And for the first time in years, I didn't flinch from the cold. I let it soak me. The clouds were already thinning, slivers of blue stretching wide above the prison walls. And just like that, the echo of him, the echo of all of them, began to fade. Some mornings I still wake up expecting the house to feel heavy, like grief might be waiting in the hallway, folded neatly where the pain used to live. But those mornings come less often now. The weight has lifted, little by little, not because everything is fine, but because I've stopped carrying things that never belonged to me. There was a time when every title I held felt like an anchor: wife, mother, caregiver, survivor. I wore them all like armor, and for a long while, I forgot there was a person underneath them. Now I'm remembering her name is Diane, and she is more than what was done to her. After Caleb's trial began to take shape, after testimonies and statements and investigators lined the edge of my life, I chose to step out of the spotlight entirely. Not out of fear, out of choice. I had been the center of someone else's story for too long. I needed to write my own. So I did. I applied for a position at a local women's shelter. Not glamorous work, hard hours, tougher stories, but every shift reminded me that survival isn't a solo act, that healing can echo outward, that the hand you reach for may not always be the one you expected, but sometimes that's exactly the point. I now sit across from women with eyes like mine used to be, cautious, dimmed, waiting for something to give. And I tell them the truth, gently, steadily, that the worst thing they ever endured does not define them, that they are not broken, just bent, that it's okay to want more than survival. Outside of work, I kept writing, not for therapy, not for a book deal, just for myself. One of those journal entries sits open on my nightstand. I go back to it often. It's dated 4 months after the confrontation at the prison. The ink is faded, but the words still ring true. Today I felt something I haven't in years. Peace. It was small, a moment, but it was mine. I drank coffee alone and didn't feel lonely. I looked in the mirror and didn't flinch. I remembered how it feels to be whole. And somewhere between journaling and walking through gardens with women who've survived worse than words, I started letting people back in. Isaac still visits. Sometimes we cook. Sometimes we just sit in silence. He helped me plant a herb garden in the spring, said it was his way of rooting something real. He doesn't call me mom. He doesn't have to. The kindness between us needs no label. Somewhere along the line, I stopped asking who I was without my son. Because now I know. I am Diane. I am whole. I am soft where I used to be stone, and stronger where I once was silent. I walk most evenings now, slow, unhurried steps down the quiet side streets just beyond my neighborhood. The same ones I used to rush through on errands, too busy being everything for everyone. Now, I take my time. There's a maple tree I stop under often. The light filters through its leaves in slanted golden beams. It reminds me that even shadows need sun to exist. And on this particular evening, the sky is that soft shade of orange that comes only after rain. The ground is still damp, the air cool, and everything smells clean. A breeze lifts my hair. I close my eyes, and I feel it. Not joy exactly, but peace. The kind you fight for, the kind you earn. I turn the corner slowly, heart light, breath even, and for the first time in what feels like forever, I think, I lived, not for them, for me. Ever trusted someone so completely you didn't see the knife in their hand? This story wasn't just fiction. It was a mirror. If the silence in your life feels a little too heavy, maybe it's time to ask why. Stick with us, because the next story might feel a little too familiar, and sometimes survival starts with simply seeing the truth.